Welcome to This Explainer. We're going to dive right into a massive, incredibly comprehensive 10-part article series that maps out exactly why our modern economy feels so relentlessly stressful for so many of us right now. The series is called The 99% Perspective, a blueprint for economic justice, and it takes a really hard, unified look at the converging forces shaping our financial lives today.
The specific crises we face might shift over the decades, but the core problem? It stays the exact same. The economy fundamentally does not work equally for the 99%. We're navigating a landscape that's engineered to favor the few at the very top. So the overarching goal of this blueprint is to connect the dots between wealth inequality, public policy, and the everyday realities that ordinary people are dealing with.
And here's the kicker. We aren't just dealing with inflation or just a housing dip or just localized job losses. We are facing a massive, overlapping combination of pressures hitting us simultaneously. If you've been feeling like you're fighting battles on multiple financial fronts lately, this series argues that you are absolutely not alone. And it's definitely not a coincidence.
To help us understand this without getting totally overwhelmed, we've broken the source material down into 5 clear sections: the modern economic crisis, the everyday survival squeeze, work and small business, AI and the future, and finally, a blueprint for economic justice.
Let's jump straight into Section 1, the modern economic crisis. The blueprint draws a really fascinating line from the Occupy Wall Street era directly to today. Think about it. Back in 2008, the financial collapse had this single obvious focal point, right? Wall Street and the banking sector. But today's crisis is far more decentralized. The target isn't just one institution, it's a systemic, multi-layered reality. It's a completely different kind of crisis, but it stems from that exact same core problem of economic imbalance. And the burden is falling hardest on working families because they're literally caught in a vice of overlapping pressures. You've got inflation, the housing squeeze, job losses, mounting debt, huge government spending, the rapid rise of AI, and small businesses just fighting to survive. And it's all happening at the exact same time. If a household gets hit by an inflation spike, a housing squeeze, and job insecurity all at once, well, stability just vanishes.
Which brings us to Section 2, the everyday survival squeeze. They call this the housing trap, and it is brutal. No matter where you are in the real estate life cycle, the walls feel like they're closing in. Trying to buy, high interest rates and prices lock you out. Struggling to pay rent, rising costs are drastically outpacing wages. And even if you're fighting to keep the home you already own, rising taxes, maintenance, and inflation make it incredibly tough. It's just an exhausting squeeze across the board. Now, when you pair that housing trap with what the authors call a collapsing financial safety net, it drives this devastating cycle of debt and bankruptcy. When housing eats up so much of your income and that safety net isn't there to catch you during a medical or occupational emergency, what happens? People are forced to rely on credit, which accelerates a painful cycle of debt that's often inescapable. It leads to this ultimate, incredibly frustrating reality of the modern cost of living crisis. Working immensely hard, putting in all the hours, doing everything right, but still feeling entirely broke. It's like sprinting on a hamster wheel, because the basic costs of survival just continually outpace what you actually earn. The financial math simply isn't working for the average household. Okay, let's move to Section 3, work and small business. The blueprint also highlights what it identifies as a specific Black jobs crisis. According to the series, a concerning convergence of current events, namely the rollback of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives colliding with rapid AI displacement, is creating a terrifying new wave of economic exclusion for Black households. They argue these overlapping forces threaten to widen the wealth gap even further for communities already fighting to establish basic economic stability. But this squeeze isn't just happening to employees. Small businesses are fighting simply to keep the lights on. They're stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, there's a severe lack of accessible capital to fund their operations, and on the other, there's a constant uphill battle to secure sustainable contracts. Small businesses are the backbone of our communities, yet this analysis shows they're facing existential threats from both sides of the ledger. Let's look ahead with Section 4, AI and the future. When it comes to AI and automation, the timeline laid out here is pretty stark. Year 1, we see the massive capabilities of the technology introduced. Within the next 5 years, swift and widespread worker displacement across multiple industries. And over a decade,
The authors project a massive concentration of wealth into the hands of the very few who actually own the technology, actively pulling capital away from the 99%.
The blueprint explicitly refuses to look at AI as just some neutral, helpful tool for productivity. Instead, it forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. Exactly who is going to bear the brunt of being replaced, and who is going to reap the enormous financial rewards of this automation wave? It pushes us to look beyond the convenience of new tech and analyze the actual economic transfer of power that's taking place.
This brings us to an absolute gut punch of a question. We hear endless reports about the stock market being up, or GDP rising, or tech stocks soaring. But if working families are trapped in debt, small businesses are squeezed for capital, and basic housing is unaffordable, we really have to ask, who is this economy actually growing for? Finally, Section 5, Blueprint for Economic Justice. Let's look at the actionable strategy. To survive all this, the blueprint argues we have to redefine the new American dream. The old markers of success are just no longer viable or protective. Instead, the only way to protect communities fighting for stability is to aggressively pivot toward tangible ownership. This means focusing on acquiring land, securing hard assets, and building true economic independence that can actually weather the overlapping storms we've just unpacked.
The path forward really requires sequential steps. First, we must clearly connect the dots between how these crises, inflation, housing, AI, government spending, actually overlap. Because only by connecting those dots and people effectively organize, shift their financial focus entirely toward ownership, and actively fight for systemic economic justice that works for everyone, not just the top 1%.
As we wrap up this explainer, the challenge for all of us is to look beyond the macro headlines. How are these overlapping crises, the impossible housing trap, the small business squeeze, the looming AI threat, rewriting the rules in your very own neighborhood? Understanding the pieces is the first step for sure. But the real question is, now that you see the blueprint, what are you going to build with it?